If you've been gardening for more than one season, you've probably had this experience. You notice a few aphids, or flea beetles or cabbage worms, and suddenly you're back in the same cycle again. Find a spray, mix a spray, apply the spray, reapply after rain, reapply after irrigation, reapply because the pests came back, reapply because now something else showed up, and before you know it, the whole garden starts to feel like a reaction instead of a system. That's where a lot of gardeners get trapped. They think the problem is that they haven't found the right product yet. But usually, the deeper problem is that the garden has been built in a way that invites pest pressure and then tries to solve it after the fact. Low input living is about moving in the opposite direction. Less panic, less purchased input, less dependence on bottles, more biology, more planning, more passive protection. And one of the best places to start is with plants that can do more than one job. Not miracle plants, not magic plants, not plants that make pests disappear forever. Plants that help, plants that confuse pests, plants that draw in predators, plants that act like decoys, plants that turn one crop bed into a more diverse and harder to attack system. In this video, I'm breaking down 8 low input plants I would use before buying another spray. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to think about them the right way. Because if you use these plants badly, they become decoration. If you use them well, they become part of your pest control strategy. Before we get into the plants themselves, we need to get one thing straight. Most pest control plants are not a force field. That's the mistake that ruins this whole topic online. People hear companion planting and they imagine one basil plant next to a tomato and suddenly all the hornworms vanish forever. Or one marigold in a corner of the bed and no aphid will ever return. That's not how this works. These plants are useful because they do one of 4 jobs. Job number 1 is confusing pests. A lot of garden pests find host plants by smell, shape, silhouette, or a mix of all 3. When you mix in aromatic herbs and flowers, you make it harder for the pest to zero in on the crop as quickly. Job number 2 is attracting the right allies. If your garden has ladybugs, hoverflies, lacewings, parasitic wasps, and pollinators moving through it all season, you're not gardening alone. You've built a living support system. Job number 3 is acting as a trap crop. Some plants are so attractive to certain pests that they can pull pressure away from your main crop. That only works if you monitor them and manage them, but when done well, it's powerful. Job number 4 is building a more stable garden overall. A more diverse garden tends to be less explosive, not pest-free. Less explosive. There's a big difference. That is the frame I want you to keep in mind as we go through these 8 plants. We are not looking for magic. We are looking for leverage. Plant number 1, basil. Basil is one of the easiest low input plants to justify in a vegetable garden because it gives you 3 returns at once. You get food. You get pollinator support once it flowers. And you get a strong aromatic presence right in the middle of summer crops that tend to draw serious pest pressure. I like basil most around tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. Not because I think it creates an invisible dome around them, but because it belongs in that same warm season part of the garden. It grows fast, and it adds another layer of scent and diversity where pests often begin to build up. If you let some basil flower, you also start getting more insect activity that works in your favor. Tiny flowers may not look dramatic to us, but they are useful stations in the garden. The mistake people make with basil is treating it like a single accent plant. One basil plant in a huge bed is not a strategy. Think in clusters. Think repeated placement. Think tucking it through the crop zone where you actually want extra activity and scent. And if you harvest basil hard and often, it keeps branching, which means you get more foliage, more fragrance, and more value from the same space. For a low-input garden, that matters. The best plants are never doing only one job. Plant number 2, dill. Dill is one of my favorite pest control plants because it plays on the predator side of the equation. A lot of gardeners focus so much on repelling pests that they forget to recruit help. Dill helps recruit help. When dill flowers, it becomes a landing pad and feeding station for beneficial insects that you absolutely want in the garden. Hoverflies, tiny wasps, predatory insects. These are the kinds of allies that make a garden feel balanced instead of overwhelmed. I especially like dill near brassicas, cucumbers and tomatoes, but I also like sowing it wherever I can spare a little room because it fills a very specific ecological role. Now here's the catch with dill. It doesn't last forever in prime condition. So, if you want dill to function as part of a pest control system and not just as one plant that bolted weeks ago, you need succession planting. Sow a little, wait a couple of weeks, sow a little more. That's the low input version of working smarter. Instead of buying something every time the pest pressure rises, you build continuity into the planting itself. A single sowing gives you a moment. Repeated sowings give you a season. That is a very different result. And once you start thinking that way, a lot of low-input gardening begins to click. Plant number 3, Calendula. Calendula is one of those plants that earns its keep in a low-input garden because it's cheerful, useful, and surprisingly strategic. A lot of people plant calendula because it looks good. That's fine. But the real value is that it broadens the garden's insect traffic in a beneficial direction. Its flowers stay productive. They fit well at bed edges, they're easy to tuck into openings, and they help create the kind of mixed planting that pest outbreaks dislike. I like calendula in visible places for one big reason. It reminds you that your garden is supposed to be alive. Too many vegetable gardens are planted like military rows, efficient to look at, vulnerable in practice. Calendula softens that rigidity, it breaks up the signal, it gives beneficial insects more reason to move through the space. And it helps keep the garden from turning into one giant visual target. If your garden is highly orderly and bare between crops, adding calendula can change the feeling of the whole bed. Not because calendula is magic, because diversity matters. And from a low-input living perspective, I love anything that improves the garden while also being easy to save seed from, easy to grow again, and easy to keep in rotation without buying more every season. Plant number 4, nasturtiums. Nasturtiums are one of the best plants to use when you stop asking, how do I kill every pest? And start asking, can I pull pressure away from my crop? That's a much smarter question. Nasturtiums are useful because they can act like a decoy. Pests often find them very attractive, which means they can take damage that might otherwise land on something you care about more. That is the trap crop mindset. Now, trap crops are not passive decoration. If you're going to use nasturtiums this way, you need to watch them. Once they're attracting pressure, that's information. That's where you inspect first. That's where you decide whether to remove bugs by hand, prune heavily infested growth, or simply let that plant continue taking the hit while your food crop stays cleaner. I like nasturtiums near squash, cucumbers, and brassicas, but not tangled so tightly into the crop that I can't see what's happening. That visibility matters. A trap crop only helps if it becomes your early warning system and your sacrificial zone. Otherwise, you've just planted an extra host. For low-input gardeners, nasturtiums make sense because they are easy, fast, edible, and multifunctional. They fill space, shade a bit of soil, bring color, and can help direct pest attention where you can manage it. That's useful design. Plant number 6, marigolds. Marigolds are probably the most overhyped and misunderstood pest control plant in home gardening. That doesn't mean they're useless. It means people expect them to do jobs they were never going to do. The internet often treats marigolds like a universal anti-bug button. Plant one marigold and apparently the whole bed becomes untouchable. That's nonsense. But marigolds can still be very useful in a low-input system when you use them as part of a bigger plan. They add root diversity, flower power, bed edge structure, and extra insect activity. Some gardeners also value specific types for how they fit into crop rotations and mixed plantings. What I like most about marigolds is that they are easy to mass. And that's important. The value of many pest control plants goes up when you stop planting one and start planting enough to matter visually, biologically, and structurally. A drift of marigolds at the front edge of a bed is very different from one lonely marigold in a tomato cage. Think patches. Think lines. Think repeated signal. Used that way, marigolds stop being a gardening superstition and start becoming a useful support plant. Plant number 7, borage. Borage is one of the best make the garden feel alive plants you can grow. It gets busy, bees love it. The flowers are beautiful, and it creates a kind of movement and activity in the garden that I think low-input growers should pay much more attention to. A silent garden is not always a balanced garden. I like borage around tomatoes and near high-value summer crops because it contributes to that larger web of insect life you want around the garden. It's not just about whether one pest dislikes borage, it's about whether borage helps make the area more attractive to everything that pushes back against imbalance. That's how ecological pest control works. Indirectly, often quietly and usually more effectively than people think. Now, barrage is not for every tiny space, it can get large. So place it intentionally, give it a role. Let it be part flower, part insectary, part signal breaker in the design. That's a low input way of thinking. You're not just growing vegetables, you're growing support functions. And once you start seeing support functions, your plant choices get much smarter. Plant number 8, thyme. If you want a low-growing herb that can be tucked into edges, borders, path margins, or the feet of larger crops, thyme is hard to beat. It stays useful without dominating. It smells strong when brushed. It fits into small spaces. And once established, it can become one of those quiet support plants that asks very little from you. That last part matters a lot for low-input living. Some plants are valuable because they're dramatic. Others are valuable because they're durable. Thyme falls into that second category. I like it around the edges of beds, where it can create a low aromatic layer, especially near crops that tend to get repeated pest attention. It won't solve everything, but it adds another layer of complexity to the planting, and another reason for the bed to feel less exposed and less simplified. And in a low input system, all those small layers matter more than one big intervention. A resilient garden is usually built from lots of little advantages stacked together. Thyme is one of those little advantages. Now, let's get into the 4 biggest mistakes people make with this whole approach. Mistake number 1, planting too little. One herb in a giant bed is not a system, it's an ornament. Mistake number 2, planting at the wrong time. If the support plant is tiny when the pest wave arrives, it's not doing much yet. Timing matters. Mistake number 3, treating trap crops like regular companion plants. If you use nasturtiums or other pest-attracting plants, you have to monitor them. Trap crops need attention. Mistake number 4, expecting plants to replace every other good practice. You still need mulch. You still need spacing. You still need healthy soil. You still need airflow. You still need observation. Companion plants work best inside a sane garden system. They do not replace one. That's why so many people say these methods don't work. Often what they really mean is they tried one tiny piece of the method in a garden design that was already inviting trouble. That's not a fair test. So, if I were building a simple, low-input pest control layout from scratch, here's what I'd do. I'd take a main vegetable bed and stop planting it as a single crop block. Around tomatoes and peppers, I'd repeat basil and chives, then tuck in a few barrage plants where they have room. Near brassicas, I'd work in dill, thyme and calendula with a clear bed edge where I can inspect for chewing damage quickly. On the outside zones, I'd use nasturtiums as my watchtower plants, the ones I check first, because they tell me what pressure is building. At the front edge or in repeated patches, I'd use marigolds and calendula to increase flower density and insect traffic. I'd mulch heavily. I'd keep the soil covered. I'd leave some flowering support plants in place instead of cleaning everything up into bare emptiness. And I'd think about succession, so at least some of these plants are always in their prime. That's not complicated. But it is intentional, and intentional planting is what separates low-input gardening from low-effort gardening. They are not the same thing. Low input does not mean careless. It means well-designed. So, here's the real takeaway. If you want fewer sprays, stop looking only for products that kill pests after they arrive. Start building beds that are harder to attack in the first place. That means more mixed planting, more useful herbs, more flowers that feed the right insects, more trap zones, more scent diversity, more observation, and fewer moments where your entire strategy depends on what's inside a bottle. Will these 8 plants make your garden pest-free? No, that's not the goal. The goal is to reduce pressure, lower the need for intervention, make the garden more resilient, and move one step closer to a system that can handle more of its own problems. That is what low-input living is really about, not perfect control. Better design. If you want a calmer, more self-supporting garden, start with the plants that can do more than one job. And if you've made it this far, tell me in the comments which one of these plants you trust the most in your own garden, and which pest is giving you the biggest headache right now, because that's where the next experiment starts.